We're looking at what makes an effective conclusion. And the key thing here is what makes it not effective, but effective as a conclusion. And these are really two slightly different things. If we're thinking about effectiveness, we're thinking about things like word choice, we're thinking imagery, we're thinking the use of questions, lists, balance and contrast, rule of three, and quite often a rule of three will be building to a climax. But if we're thinking of effective as a conclusion, we're looking for a little bit more than that. So if it's imagery, for example, is it an image that's been used in the title or perhaps the introduction, which is now repeated in the conclusion, a particular metaphor or simile that the writer has found effective? Is there a question at the end to get the readers to take action, decide what side they're on, go out and this is a persuasive piece of writing, so you want to get your readers feeling that they want to go out and change the world after you've read it? Does it return in some way to what happened at the opening? So does it return to the same story, the same example? Quite often you might do that. Now, I've kept saying the introduction, but it doesn't have to be the introduction. Anywhere early in the passage will be absolutely fine. So let's see how this might work in practice. You should have read the article in Harry and Meghan. This is what the introduction looked like. It's the stuff rom-coms are made of. Beautiful young woman meets charming prince, and after a series of mild miscommunications, they live happily ever after. Well, that's how it's supposed to go, at least. And then it points out that with Meghan Markle, the happy ending looks a little bit different now. This is the conclusion. It seems that much of Britain desperately wants to be absolved its racist history without doing any work to combat racism, treating marginalisation and discrimination like imagined annoyances not worth confronting. Now, here we see the main reason why this writer has chosen to write the article, because she's trying to show us that Britain is not as race-free a place as we might think, that there are still racist attitudes that go right through society. And all she's really doing with Meghan is using that as a hook, as a way in to get us interested in this important topic. So the second sentence of the conclusion, but looking at the fate of a royal couple that was supposed to symbolise progression and a supposedly post-racial British society, it seems clear there is still much work to be done. So in the introduction, we start off with Meghan Markle. We talk about that she's got a good reason for wanting to leave Britain. And in the conclusion, we can see royal couple, back to Harry and Meghan again, and supposedly post-racial British society. This is the problem that means that Meghan needs to leave the country because of the racist abuse she was getting in so much of the coverage of her. So, Homelessness by Philip Pullman. This is his introduction. The plight of homeless people and our reaction to it are part of the hideous tangle this country has got into. There are so many strands leading into this appalling knot that if we pull any one of them, the tangle gets worse. So the opening tells us that it's going to be about the plight of the homeless. It tells us that it's a very difficult problem. We've got the metaphor of the knot. And this is the conclusion. And we have to do it soon, and we can only start from where we are. On Thursday, we have a general election. And then he goes on to explain that we should be using our vote to help to end homelessness, and that means voting for a new government, not the one that we've got already. So the introduction starts off by talking about what the problem is. The conclusion tells us no matter how difficult the problem is, we have to make a start of solving it, and also that clear call to action. So effective as a conclusion, because it links back to explaining it doesn't matter how difficult this problem is, it needs to be solved, and this is the way to solve it. And from the Music Saved My Life Banning Drill article, the writer starts by telling us about how he grew up in Thornton Heath, southeast London. Although raised by a good family in a close community, I was exposed to violence and violent crime throughout my childhood and adult life. And he goes on to give some very specific examples of violence. His mother was shot, his stepfather was shot and killed. And for him, that was normal. And this is how it ends. Expression, even if it is confronting, scary and violent, is important, particularly for a deprived and otherwise voiceless community. If you take that away, you not only take away our voices, but you take away any hope of positivity and change. And isn't positivity and change, not suspicion and silencing people, what we need now more than ever? So we start with violence and violent crime. We start from the sufferings of the Black community. And where do we end? That expression is important for this community. Deprived and otherwise voiceless. And this is a really nice example of a conclusion that focuses on a question at the end. Isn't positivity and change, not suspicion and silence people, what we need now more than ever? So this is great because nobody is going to say, oh, no, positivity and change, that sounds like a terrible idea. We don't want that. It's a rhetorical question because the way the question's been set up, you've got no option but to answer yes. Of course we want positivity and change. Of course we don't want to be suspicious and silence people. So we've got a rhetorical question that helps to persuade the reader of the rightness of his argument that we should allow people self-expression, that actually trying to censor music like drill music is disastrous, and that these people are traumatised. What might come out of that trauma might not be very comfortable for everybody else to listen to, but it's really important that they have a voice. So these are the kind of specific examples that you would talk about when you're talking about the conclusion. It sums up the writer's ideas, is what everybody wants to say, but what are these ideas? And why is perhaps the rhetorical question an incredibly effective way of doing it? And the last one, language is part of the machinery of oppression. Just look at how Black deaths are described. This is quite a complex one. Vocabulary is really very challenging in this particular one. But she starts, or she doesn't, in fact, this is one where the conclusion actually links back to somewhere in the middle. The really powerful story of a man experiencing a mental health crisis, stealing something totally trivial, snacks from a convenience store, and tossed them into the street, allegedly brandishing a steak knife and calling out to the police, shoot me, shoot me, shoot me now. They obliged him 12 times over. So she uses the word linguistic at the start. She uses the word linguistic in the conclusion because she's talking about how language makes things difficult for people. And she shows why she's not happy with that idea of language, the idea that suicide by cop suggests that it's actually the fault of the person who asked the police to shoot him, not the fault of the police for agreeing to do so as instructed by someone who's having a mental health crisis. That's not really a very responsible thing for a public servant to do. So she comes back to the idea of she keeps turning the dead into deadly agents of their own demise. Now, this isn't what she thinks they are. She says that if we're using language like suicide by cop, we're blaming the person who's dead rather than the policeman who dealt with a mental health crisis by shooting the victim.